It started quietly. No warning, no confrontation, no dramatic fallout. Just silence, the kind that creeps in like fog, unnoticed, until you're already lost in it. A calendar invite that never arrived. A Slack thread I somehow wasn't tagged in. My name, once prominent and always near the top of project lists, began to slip, like water through fingers. At first, I told myself it was an oversight. 18 years with the company had earned me a level of trust and respect that wasn't so easily discarded. I was Morena Vega, Senior Manager of Strategic Communications, the woman who guided this company through 3 crises, 2 rebrands, and more late-night launch scrambles than I could count. People came to me for clarity, for calm, for answers. I was indispensable. But even titans can erode. The first sign? The quarterly planning session. I wasn't invited. That meeting had my fingerprints all over it. I had designed the structure of those sessions back in 2011, back when we were still renting shared office space and begging for angel investment. I had sat at the helm of every one of them since. But this time? Nothing. I found out through Lisa in finance, who mentioned it while we waited for coffee. "You were quiet yesterday," she said with a smirk, thinking I was playing politics. "Didn't want to weigh in on the new vendor picks?" Bold move. I blinked. "What vendor picks?" Her face changed. "Wait, you weren't there?" I laughed it off. "Had a conflict, might have missed the invite." Back at my desk, I tore through my calendar. No invite, not missed, not accidentally deleted. It had never come. By Wednesday, my access to the shared campaign folders was gone. The permissions had been revoked. I emailed IT. Marcus replied an hour later with a vague, "This may be part of access realignment during restructuring. Let me know if the issue persists." Restructuring. That word sank in my chest like a stone. I'd survived restructures before. I knew their smell, their rhythm. This wasn't about streamlining. This was about clearing space. Then came the presentation. I had spent 3 nights perfecting our upcoming launch deck. Tight language, crisp visuals, a narrative arc that would convince even the stingiest stakeholders to triple their investment. I submitted it to the review channel. Crickets. 2 days later, a new version went out to the exec team. My content, my slides, tweaked just enough to avoid suspicion, with no attribution. The sender? Dylan Mercer. Dylan was the new VP of Innovation, all buzzwords and bravado. He smiled like he was selling you something. And maybe he was. A dream, a rebrand, a version of the company where people like me didn't exist. He called it cultural realignment. I called it what it was. Erasure. That Friday, I sat in my office, still mine, for now, watching my calendar fill with meetings I hadn't been invited to. My old meetings, strategy calls, creative syncs, team stand-ups. They all had new leads now, new names, junior names, people who, 3 months ago, were coming to me for mentorship. Even my assistant Clara was different. She stopped bringing printouts to my desk, stopped asking if I wanted to join calls. Her eyes darted when I passed her desk, like I was a ghost, or a reminder. I wasn't being fired. No, that would be too simple, too obvious. This was more calculated. They weren't pushing me out. They were erasing me, quietly, systematically. That night, I stayed late. Not to catch up on work. There wasn't much left to catch up on. But to think. To observe. The office emptied around me. The lights dimmed. My reflection stared back at me from the window. I used to feel power in this view. Now I just felt distance. I opened a file I hadn't touched in a while. A side project. One I'd been building quietly for months. A tool to track actual project contributions across departments. Clean data. No politics. Just metrics. Who was pulling weight? Who was padding reports? Who mattered? I wasn't in that tool for visibility. I was in it for truth. And now? It might be the only thing that could prove I had ever been here at all. They thought I would go quietly. They were wrong. I was still here, watching, preparing. And soon, they'd remember exactly who I was. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of day so normal, it almost felt like a setup. I was reviewing the final edits on the internal launch messaging when a calendar invite popped up. Subject line: Check-in. Departmental transition. No context. Just 3 names. Dylan Mercer, HR lead Caitlin Phelps, and me. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. I didn't know we had a transition happening. I clicked accept out of habit and walked down the corridor toward conference room B. Glass walls, neutral carpet, a dying spider plant in the corner. It looked like a room built for polite endings. Dylan was already there when I arrived. Tie loosened, but posture military straight. Caitlin sat beside him, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. "Thanks for coming, Morena," Caitlin said without a smile. I sat, straightened my skirt, clasped my hands. Dylan didn't bother with pleasantries. "We'll keep this brief," he said, folding his hands. "As of this morning, your role with the company has been dissolved as part of departmental restructuring." Dissolved? The word was so sterile, it almost didn't register. I blinked. "I see." "This decision is final," Caitlin added, as if I'd already objected. "Your access will be terminated by end of day. You'll receive a formal notice via email. HR will coordinate next steps for offboarding." No explanations, no performance critique, no reference to my tenure, just procedure. I glanced at Dylan. His face was a wall. Was there a review? Any feedback? He didn't flinch. "This isn't about performance. It's a strategic direction." Translation: "This is happening. We don't care how you feel about it." I nodded once. "Am I allowed to say goodbye to my team?" Caitlin exchanged a quick look with Dylan. "We'd prefer you didn't. It's cleaner this way." Cleaner. I stood slowly. My legs didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. "Understood." Caitlin handed me a thin white envelope. "This outlines your severance terms and the NDA. We'd appreciate a signature by Friday." I didn't take the envelope. Not yet. "I built this department," I said, not with anger, but fact. "From the ground up." Dylan's mouth twitched. Not a smile, not regret, just motion. "We're grateful for your contributions." "Grateful," I repeated softly, but not enough to look me in the eye and explain why. Neither of them responded. I picked up the envelope, tucked it under my arm, turned without another word. No handshake, no thank you, no closure. By the time I returned to my office, my login was already disabled. My team's Slack had vanished from my sidebar. My email redirected to access denied. Clara's desk was empty. They'd told her too, it seemed. No chaos, no mess, just a surgical extraction. And in its place? Silence. Again. But this time, the silence had shape. I left without packing a box, without a goodbye lunch, without the luxury of denial. But I walked out knowing something they didn't. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the cleanest page they'd ever tried to turn. I shouldn't have returned. That's what logic said. That's what dignity whispered, in the quiet space between sleep and bitterness. But logic and dignity hadn't built this place. I had. So the next morning, I came in like I still belonged, like no one had sliced my name from the payroll and vacuum-sealed my career into a severance envelope. No one tried to stop me. That somehow was worse. I nodded to the front desk security, like I always did. The scanner blinked green without hesitation. I stepped into the elevator, alone. There was a flicker of doubt as I pressed the button for the 19th floor. But when the doors opened and the hallway greeted me with that familiar mix of recycled air and too strong lavender cleaner, all I felt was purpose. I was already a ghost. I just hadn't decided what kind of ghost I wanted to be yet. My old office was still marked Vega, though the plaque had been half peeled away, leaving behind a smudge of adhesive and shame. The lights were on inside. So was someone else's laptop. Megan Chu sat in my chair. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her posture nervous but proud. She wore the exact blazer I once gave her after her first team presentation, the one she called my lucky armor. She looked up, startled. Morena. I just came to grab something, I said calmly, stepping in before she could offer guilt or sympathy. 5 minutes. She nodded too quickly, already rising. Sure, yes, of course. She disappeared into the hallway, and I was alone again. Almost. The walls were still mine. The layout. The framed timeline of campaigns was gone, probably in some storage closet labeled miscellaneous. But I saw the shape of where it had hung. The ghost of impact. I walked past the desk. Didn't touch anything. I wasn't here for memories. In the lounge, a department-wide session was underway. The presentation was projected on the main wall, sleek and minimal, just how I used to design them. I watched from the shadows of the hallway. A young strategy analyst, Ryan, I think, was nervously walking the room through the proposed brand evolution for Q4. And then I saw it. Slide 4. Concept, origin, and strategy. My layout, my campaign name, the market segmentation I spent 3 weekends finessing. There, in the lower right corner, was my headshot, cropped from the company's old leadership page. No label, no created by, no voice, just my face, like a museum artifact. I didn't flinch, I didn't cry, I didn't storm into the room demanding answers. Instead, I turned away. It wasn't grief, it was something quieter, sharper. I knew now what they were doing. They weren't stealing my work, they were embalming it, polishing the parts that looked impressive in a slide deck while bearing the inconvenient truth of who built it. I descended the stairs to the 18th floor. Someone had left a note on the hot desk near the printer. Free for now. Help yourself. How generous. I sat down, opened my laptop. Out of habit, I tried logging into the core dashboard, the proprietary platform I had spent a year building in quiet hours and stolen weekends. It opened instantly, and not just with read-only permissions, full administrative access. At first, I froze. Then, slowly, I began clicking. The internal architecture unfolded before me. Clean, precise, elegant. My work. Every contribution tracked, measured, visualized in a living, breathing digital map of company effort. I had built it to make invisible work visible, to show who was really driving results and who was coasting on air and buzzwords. Apparently, they'd forgotten to revoke my access when they erased my name. I clicked deeper. The back-end controls were untouched. My developer credentials still worked. My oversight was still active. No one had noticed I was still the primary owner of the system. They had used my slides, my ideas, my reputation, but they hadn't taken my code. I sat back in the flimsy office chair, the hum of the printer masking my pulse in my ears. They wanted me gone, but the machine, the system that actually told the truth, still answered to me. A part of me wanted to pull the plug right then, crash the dashboards, corrupt the data, make them crawl. But no, that would be too loud, too dramatic. No, what I wanted was precision. What I wanted was the truth to rise, slowly, unstoppably, until they couldn't pretend not to see it. I looked at the screen again. Still glowing, still mine. They may have cut me out of the story, but the platform, it still remembered. And now it was my move. I didn't build it out of spite, or ambition, or even loyalty. I built it because I was tired. Tired of watching hours disappear in meeting rooms where the loudest voices got credit and the quietest did the work. Tired of seeing junior analysts burn out while someone else's name topped the report. Tired of being asked to prove our department's value to executives who didn't read past the subject line. So I started small. Nights, weekends, lunch breaks. I learned Python on the train home, bought a second monitor, and set it up in the corner of my studio like a secret weapon. I sketched the first wireframe on the back of a napkin in a diner after a team meeting where someone had said, "Does content even move the needle?" I called it Axis, just a placeholder name, a word that meant structure, clarity, center. That's what I wanted to give my team. a center that couldn't be ignored. Axis was never flashy. It didn't dazzle with animations or buzzwords. It was clean, fast, honest. It integrated seamlessly with the company's back-end systems and quietly pulled metadata from every campaign, every doc, every ticket, and cross-referenced who did what. No spin, no rounding up, just output. It didn't rank people. It revealed patterns. Who contributed consistently? Who created bottlenecks? Who bridged departments? Who carried weight? The early results made me pause, because what it showed wasn't just inequality, it was efficiency, hidden in plain sight. The people being dismissed were the ones doing the work, and the ones climbing were the ones closest to the credit waterfall. I didn't show anyone at first. I wasn't sure what it meant, what it would cause. But as our department was slowly restructured out of existence, Axis became my lighthouse. Not revenge, not leverage, just truth. Quiet and waiting. That day, sitting at the borrowed hot desk, I pulled up the original license agreement I had buried in my personal cloud drive. Because Axis didn't run on company software. I hadn't used corporate resources to build it. I'd paid for the third-party integration keys with my own card. I had the receipts. The codebase lived on a separate server until it went live inside the company's firewall. And the agreement? The IP remained mine. I read the clause twice. Then again. Ownership of the source architecture, including logic modules, UI design, and back-end configurations, belonged to the original developer, transferable only by notarized release. Any commercial use without release required written consent. I'd drafted that clause myself, paranoid and precise. They had deployed it, loved it, praised it, quietly, but they had never claimed it. And now, I held the keys. I sat back in the chair, watching the cursor blink at the edge of the page. Not angry, not triumphant. Just clear. Axis wasn't a product. It was the foundation. Not just of my work, but of theirs. And now, every slide they presented, every metric they celebrated, every strategy they built on that foundation, they were standing on my shoulders. They just didn't know the ground still moved with my breath. And I had no plans to shake it. Not yet. It had been a quiet day, deceptively so. The kind of stillness that makes you think nothing is happening, while in the background, tectonic plates are shifting. I had spent most of it camped at the corner hot desk, pretending to work on resume updates, though in truth, I'd barely touched a document. What was the point? Everything I might have written felt like a ghost version of who I had been. Strategic communications leader, change architect, proven results. All of it, sandcastles trying to look like stone. At 6:54 p.m., just as I was about to shut down, my phone rang. Unknown number. Palo Alto area code. I almost didn't answer, but something, gut, instinct, memory, pushed my finger to the green icon. Morena, the voice said immediately, unmistakable in its warmth and slight rasp. Please tell me what the hell I just heard isn't true. My breath caught. Mateo? Dylan says you left, voluntarily, that you felt it was time. His voice dropped that last phrase into the conversation like it was a rotting fish. I closed my laptop slowly. I suppose that's what he's telling people. Then it's not true? No, I said, heat rising. It's not. I didn't leave. I was removed. One meeting, no warning, no thank you. Just HR and a white envelope. Silence crackled across the line like tension. Then Mateo sighed. Long, frustrated. God damn it. He wasn't just an investor. He was the first believer. The man who walked into our barely held together prototype pitch 6 years ago and said, "She's already building tomorrow's process. You just haven't realized today's is broken." He'd introduced us to 2 of our largest backers, sat in on our earliest town halls. Every founder talks about someone who gives them their first runway. Mateo was mine. They made it sound like you were pursuing a sabbatical, he muttered now. Said you were stepping away to make space for new energy. I told Dylan, point blank, that I didn't buy it. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say. They didn't come to me, Morena, Mateo continued, more serious now. They didn't ask, didn't flag anything with the board, which, as you well remember, violates your Series B clause. I blinked. The clause. I had almost forgotten. Not completely, but enough to let it slide into the background while the shock of what had happened consumed me. It was your line item, Mateo said. You fought for it after that second round of board reshuffles. Remember? The one where they wanted to make your role advisory, just so they could parachute in a co-founder with a podcast? I let out a hollow laugh. Yeah, I remember. You were labeled critical operational leadership. It was explicit. In the event of involuntary removal of key personnel, investor partners may revoke or renegotiate terms within 14 business days. It's enforceable. Even now? Especially now, Mateo said. You didn't walk away. You were cut out without notice. That triggers the clause. If I pull out, 5 others will follow. You know that. You're the reason we invested. I stared at the bland conference wall in front of me, suddenly sharp with possibility. I'm not trying to burn it down, I said. Not yet. Good, Mateo replied, because I'm not here to start a fire. I'm here to help you take back what's already yours. My throat tightened. He paused. Unless you want me to make the call anyway, I'll do it. You say the word, and we send Dylan Mercer into the biggest investor PR nightmare of his career. No, I said. Not yet. But you can do something else. Anything. I turned back to my laptop, opened the outline I hadn't touched since I named it. Axis 2.0. Not revenge, not retaliation, just the next iteration. I'm going to finish what I started, I said. But this time, it won't be buried in someone else's brand. Mateo's voice softened. You know I'll back you. Just send the draft. I looked out the window. The city was glowing again. I hadn't noticed. I'll send it tonight. We hung up, and in the silence that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope, power, reclaimed. The folder was thicker than I remembered. It lived at the back of my bookshelf, behind old product brochures and a warped hardcover about design ethics I never finished. Dust had gathered at the edges, and the manila paper had started to curl, the way neglected things often do when time forgets them. But I hadn't forgotten. Not really. It was almost midnight when I finally opened it. The apartment was hushed, city noise reduced to distant hums and the occasional passing horn. I hadn't touched this documentation in over a year, but my hands knew where to go. My fingers found the marked tab before I even processed the section titles. Platform Axis V3.2 Deployment Contract. I pulled it free and placed it flat on my desk. The paper was warm under the lamplight. Familiar. A little worn, but intact. This was the contract I had written during the third overhaul of the platform, when Axis had gone from a department tool to a core operating system. We were growing fast then, maybe too fast. Leadership was pushing for enterprise-wide rollout, and I remember feeling something tighten in my chest when the legal team floated full company ownership. Standard IP clause, they'd said. Just a formality. But I hadn't trusted standard. Not then. Not after watching a colleague get swept under the rug 2 months earlier when her workflow system got absorbed, renamed, and retrofitted under someone else's pet project. Her name was nowhere on the documentation. By the time she realized what had happened, it was too late. So I drafted my own clause. I remembered the night clearly. Rain against the office window. My laptop balanced on a stack of UX wireframes. A cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I'd written the section myself, without legal's polish, but with airtight logic. And here it was. Section 11.2. Ownership and modification rights. All proprietary infrastructure, logic branches, and structural integrations developed within Platform Axis V3.2 and preceding builds shall remain the sole intellectual property of the developer of record, hereinafter developer, unless explicitly transferred via signed and notarized release agreement. Use of Platform v3.2 is licensed, not sold. Any commercial redistribution, rebranding, or modification requires written consent from the developer. Beneath it, my name, Morena Vega, typed clean and deliberate, the original PDF timestamped and sealed by both our CTO and the IP compliance officer at the time. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the clarity of it. It was so plain, so direct. I owned it. Not metaphorically, not in spirit, legally. They had built every subsequent feature, every dashboard, every forecasting tool, every strategy deck, on top of Axis v3.2. They'd plugged it into every department, trained new hires using its reports, even pitched it to investors as proof of internal innovation. And none of it was theirs. They never signed the release. There was no transfer of ownership. They'd scaled the system. But the heart of it, the logic, the structure, the part that actually made it work, was mine. They couldn't legally sell it. They couldn't white label it. They couldn't modify even a single function without my signature. And they never asked. Of course they didn't. They thought I'd forgotten. That I'd been too eager, too trusting, too focused on building to notice the fine print. But I had written the fine print, not to weaponize, to protect. And now, the irony struck me with the weight of inevitability. They had cut me out, tried to silence me, and in doing so, they'd exposed themselves. Because their entire operational framework, the platform Dylan kept referring to in investor calls as our secret sauce, was mine. I glanced back at the printout. My name stared back at me, calm and undeniable. I didn't feel giddy. I didn't even feel vindicated. I felt steady, like a tree remembering its roots. They had tried to erase me, but they'd built their empire on my code. And now the foundation was humming again, quiet, loyal, and still answering to its original architect. Let them talk about innovation. Let them pitch agility and vision in their glossy decks. I didn't need a press release. I had the source code. And now, I had the contract to go with it. The meeting invite came without fanfare. No subject line drama, no red flags. Just a bland calendar notification labeled Strategic Risk Review, Q2. Attached was a single encrypted link. No agenda, no location. That alone told me everything. People in real danger don't announce the fire. They whisper the evacuation route. I clicked the link exactly 2 minutes early. A waiting room screen blinked once before letting me in. Then the feed resolved, 6 boxes in a grid. 5 familiar faces, 1 new. No greetings. Just quiet faces that had seen something they didn't like. Mateo was front and center. "Morena," he said, voice low but sharp. "Glad you made time." "Of course," I replied. To his left sat Jacqueline Ross, senior partner at Artisan Capital, and an investor known for her ability to cut through noise with surgical precision. Dev Patel, who represented the Metrix Growth Fund, was beside her, glasses reflecting the screen. Lucian from Southbeam Ventures gave me a brief nod. The final square was marked only Observer Council, the woman inside it offering no introduction. This wasn't casual. This wasn't curiosity. This was a hearing. Mateo wasted no time. We were presented with a monetization proposal last week, a product called Axis X. It was pitched as a proprietary analytics engine fully developed and owned by the company. He paused, watching me closely. "Does that name mean anything to you?" I didn't blink. "Yes." Jacqueline spoke next. "According to internal documentation, Axis X powers almost all of their departmental performance tools. It's being positioned as their flagship operational system. The deck claims it was built in-house by Dylan's technical team." My hands stayed still in my lap. "That's not true," I said. Lucian leaned forward. "You built it." "I did. It's called Axis. I began development 3 years ago using personal resources. The original versions were designed outside of company time. By v3.2, it had become a company standard platform. But that version, the foundation of Axis, is still under a personal license. Mine. "Was there a transfer of rights?" asked Dev. No, I never signed one. The company licensed use of V3.2, but never purchased it outright. The ownership clause is clear. They cannot modify, rebrand, or sell it without written consent. I have the signed contract. Mateo glanced off camera, probably toward a legal advisor. We cross-checked version logs, he said. Your name appears in over 90% of the back-end commits. Even the root directory still references Vega, Axis, 3.2, Core. It's sloppy. They didn't even scrub the source trail. The woman labeled Observer Counsel finally spoke. Have you ever authorized resale? No, I replied, and I was never asked. Jacqueline's tone cooled even further. They're attempting to sell a licensed system they do not own. That's grounds for legal action. And, Mateo added, they did this after removing you from the company, without board disclosure, without investor approval. He looked at me directly. You didn't resign, did you? No, I said. I was called into a meeting with Dylan and HR. I was informed that my role had been dissolved. There was no review, no documentation, just an envelope and a locked account. And no mention of Axis? Lucienne asked. None. They thought I'd go quietly. Dev Patel shook his head. They always do. Jacqueline leaned back, folding her hands. Do you want to press charges? The question landed like a thunderclap in the silence that followed. I didn't answer immediately, because I wasn't here for revenge, not really. I was here to restore the truth and protect what I built. They can keep their meetings, their reshuffles. I don't care about optics, I said. But they don't get to stand on my code and call it innovation. They don't get to steal my work and sell it as theirs. I reached beside me and held up the printed agreement. IP clause highlighted in bold yellow. They broke this, I said. I want it corrected. Publicly, legally, immediately. Mateo's face shifted, just slightly. Pride, maybe, or relief. You'll have it, he said. This goes back to the board today. The sale is frozen. Council is already preparing a formal rebuke. And Morena? He paused. We're pulling our funding. All of us. I blinked. You are? They breached investor trust, lied about core IP, and violated terms. This isn't a gray area. This is theft. He smiled, grim and sharp. They wanted disruption. They're about to get it. I exhaled slowly, not from fear, from the release of carrying a burden no one else had seen. You're not just protecting your IP, Jacqueline said softly. You're reclaiming your name. And in that moment, I knew. They'd tried to erase me. But all they did was reawaken the force that built the foundation they thought they owned. And now the roof was about to remember who laid its first brick. I didn't draft a long post. Didn't go on a podcast. Didn't write an exposé for some digital outlet that loves a woman in tech betrayed by her own headline. I didn't need to. That was their way, their language. Smoke and mirrors, buzz and spin. I wasn't here for noise. I was here for memory. And sometimes the sharpest knife is just a sentence. It happened early, 4:43 a.m., to be exact. The city was still breathing in its sleep. My apartment was dark except for the blue light of my laptop. I was wide awake, clarity replacing the exhaustion I'd been dragging around like a second skin. I opened the internal platform. They hadn't revoked all my access, not the legacy interface I built for leadership communications. The one I coded myself because I was tired of relying on inconsistent email chains and filtered Slack channels. They'd forgotten that back door. Or maybe they thought I wouldn't remember. I remembered everything. I navigated to the momentum board. That's what we used to call it. A place for internal victories, quotes, light bulb moments, where we celebrated people without needing formal approval, back when we still knew how to say thank you. It was still active, still a place people checked, out of habit more than curiosity. I hovered over the new post button. No drama, no declarations. Just this. I was there when trust was built. Now you ask why it disappeared? I didn't sign my name, didn't attach a file, didn't leave a hashtag or a timestamp. just truth. And then I clicked post. After that, I closed the laptop and let it go. The ripple didn't hit right away. It never does with this kind of thing. But it started. Like all real things do. Small. By 9:12 a.m., the post had been screenshotted and circulated among team channels. By noon, it had been quietly added to the end of at least 2 internal email threads, with subject lines like, "Important context," and "Anyone else see this?" And then it moved up. Managers started replying with measured language. Directors stopped replying at all. Dylan, I heard, canceled 2 calls that afternoon. One with an international partner, another with a VC who had been on the fence. HR sent a company-wide email about misinformation and maintaining professionalism. That only confirmed everything. The thing about truth is, you don't need to defend it, you only need to show it. My message did exactly what I needed it to do. It made them look over their shoulder, not at me, at themselves. By Thursday morning, Artisan pulled out. The first domino, no press release, just a 1-line internal memo. We are revisiting our alignment with current leadership. That same afternoon, Metrics canceled a scheduled onboarding with the expansion team. By Friday, Southbeam Ventures formally withdrew from the Axis X monetization effort. Quietly, like a hand being pulled from a handshake mid-grip. Inside the company, the noise got louder, but not the productive kind. People stopped posting to the momentum board. No more cheerful gifs, no more team wins. The air grew tense, meetings shorter, conversations clipped. One by one, I began receiving messages from old colleagues. Not panicked, not dramatic, just honest. "I didn't know." "I'm sorry." "I should have said something." "Thank you." Some even sent a single emoji. The hourglass. They knew what time it was. By the following week, Dylan was reportedly re-evaluating the scope of Axis X, which, in executive language, means scrambling to cover legal exposure and build a new narrative. But the damage was done. Not by a lawsuit, not by scandal, by a single line, by truth delivered in a whisper. And when you build a company on half-truths and hollow victories, even a whisper can bring the ceiling down. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need applause. I just needed them to remember. And now they would. Because I had been there when trust was built. And they had the audacity to ask why it disappeared. It started with a sentence. Not a speech, not a manifesto, just one line. I was there when trust was built. Now you ask why it disappeared. No hashtags, no tags, no timestamp. I posted it on a system they thought I no longer had access to, an internal forum tucked away in the back end, used for cultural kudos and team spirit moments. It was a footnote in their busy week. But not for long. By the time the first employee opened their morning coffee and saw it, the wheels had already begun to turn. Not with outrage, with memory. The silence around the message was what gave it power. No one replied to it. No one acknowledged it publicly. But within 24 hours, the mood inside the company had changed, imperceptibly at first. Slack channels quieted. Jokes disappeared. Project check-ins became abrupt, stilted. A junior project manager deleted a motivational quote she'd posted the day before. Someone else archived an internal blog titled Lessons from Leadership. People didn't know whether to grieve or brace for impact. And outside those walls, the storm was already building. The first publication was discreet, factual. One of those tech newsletters that investors read with their morning espresso. Unlicensed platform at center of IP dispute. Funding may be affected. Within a day, it was reshared by every analyst who had ever doubted Dylan's charm or questioned the company's sudden efficiency gains. 3 days later, TechCrux ran a piece with my photo. An old one, but accurate. The woman behind the code. They tried to forget. That one spread. Fast. Not because I said anything, I didn't, but because I didn't have to. The investors knew, and they started moving. One by one, deals that had been 99% signed fell through. The Toronto buyer, who was supposed to purchase the Axis rebrand, paused due diligence, then went silent. A German logistics client pulled out of an integration trial, citing structural concerns. A major Southeast Asian fund that had already transferred a deposit for Q3 rollout demanded it back within 48 hours. Then the Tel Aviv syndicate published a simple statement. Innovation is built on truth. We stand with original creators. Inside the company, it was a bloodletting. Finance froze expense accounts. Payroll missed a deadline. One department lead tried to present a culture reset initiative. No one showed up to the meeting. I wasn't watching every move. I didn't need to. I could feel the pull shifting. In the silence between meetings. In the threads that weren't replied to. In the carefully neutral language HR adopted to explain why the holiday party was postponed indefinitely. I became the name they didn't dare speak, but couldn't stop thinking about. I went from former employee to architect, from problem to principal, from fired to irreplaceable. And it wasn't a title I claimed. It was one they gave me. Because in every conversation about what had gone wrong, my absence echoed louder than Dylan's presence. They had built their future on a foundation I poured, and when they tried to erase me, the structure buckled. Not overnight, not explosively, but steadily, unforgivingly, like gravity reasserting itself. My inbox filled with messages I didn't ask for, from old teammates, from current staff, from people I barely knew but who had watched from the sidelines, wishing they'd spoken up sooner. I remember your first version. You built the engine we still run on. They're trying to replicate it. It's not working. Everything's stalled. The code's unstable. The new team doesn't understand what you created. If you're building again, I want in. By the second week, I heard Dylan's name floated less and less. He stopped appearing in company updates. His calendar, once full of investor check-ins, now showed only internal strategy meetings, and even those were marked tentative. A friend in IT forwarded me a system update request. Reassess long-term sustainability of Axis-based frameworks. Translation? We don't know how this works without her. They didn't even try to fix it. They were just trying to survive it. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. No victory lap, no headlines, just stillness. Because in a world addicted to noise, silence is power. And my silence? It was surgical. Because every time someone wondered, what really happened? My message was still there, glowing like a single ember that refused to die. I was there when trust was built. Now you ask why it disappeared. And in that ember, everything was already burning. The first call came at 7:03 a.m. Brandon. His name appeared on my screen like a reflex I hadn't felt in weeks. I didn't answer. I didn't even hesitate. I watched the call ring out in silence, the way you watch a leaf drift past a window. Aware of it, but untouched. He didn't leave a voicemail. At 9:17 a.m., he tried again. Then 2:06 p.m. Then 8:41 p.m. Over 3 days, there were 12 missed calls in total. The man who once sent me calendar invites to discuss feedback realignment was now calling without notice, without prep, without script. And that alone told me more than words ever could. He was desperate. They were unraveling. And they were doing it without me. I didn't block his number. I didn't need to. My silence was doing what no confrontation ever could. It filled the space they'd tried to push me out of. And it made them realize I'd never actually left. The lawsuits dropped quietly at first, like raindrops before a monsoon. Artisan and Metrics filed a joint suit. Civil, structured, precise. Breach of fiduciary responsibility. Failure to disclose material risk. Misrepresentation of IP ownership. The numbers attached were staggering. 8 figures at minimum, contingent on projected damages. Within 72 hours, 2 additional firms followed, and a third launched a formal inquiry into the board's compliance practices. Every complaint named the same infraction: unauthorized commercial use of Platform Axis v3.2, legally attributed to Ms. Morena Vega, not former employee, not terminated contributor. Ms. Morena Vega, founder, architect, owner. Inside the company, it was chaos, but not the kind with flames and shouting. No, this was the quiet kind, the kind that infects calendars and clogs inboxes, the kind where everyone shows up, but no one speaks. Weekly strategy syncs turned into 15-minute recaps with no action items. Dylan stopped showing up altogether. By Thursday, HR was tasked with auditing the entire performance management system after one investor discovered his confidential review data had been included in a presentation slide, generated, of course, through Axis. The platform was now legally frozen. No one could update it. No one dared touch it. Their tools had become evidence. In the meantime, Brandon kept calling. Each ring was slower, more spaced apart, as if even he was starting to realize what I already knew. There was nothing to fix. You don't negotiate with absence. You live with it. My inbox swelled. Old clients, past team leads, even people who had once passively watched me get pushed aside. They wrote messages that weren't apologies, not exactly, but acknowledgments. Everything's stalled. The new guys don't get it. They tried to patch the platform with freelance help. It's glitching. If you're building anything, I want in. I don't care what it is. One came from Ava, a junior developer I once mentored. She had stayed quiet during the transition, never speaking up when I was let go. But now, she wrote, they treated you like a process, but you were the architecture. By the end of the month, it was no longer a company in crisis. It was a brand in freefall. The PR firm resigned. 3 directors stepped down. A non-profit partner withdrew a 6-figure licensing deal. In their official statement, they wrote, integrity begins with how you treat the people who build your foundation. No one argued anymore about who built the system. Even the company's own legal team conceded, on record, that Axis could no longer be presented in public-facing documents without legal clarification. That clarification was this: built by Morena Vega, licensed to, company name, limited rights under V3.2 contract, all modification rights retained by developer, my name reinstated, not by forgiveness, by fact. I never answered Brandon's calls, not because I hated him, because he represented the part of the company that always saw me as a function, not a force. And now? He finally saw the difference. I walked past the office once. Just once. It looked the same on the outside. The glass shimmered. The company logo still clung to the wall like it mattered. But inside, I could feel the emptiness. Not physical, cultural, foundational. They didn't just lose an employee. They lost the pattern, the rhythm, the soul, and no one knew how to rebuild it. I got a final message from Brandon, text only. Please, one meeting. We didn't understand what we had until it was gone. The message came on a Monday. No subject line, no formal intro, just a name I hadn't seen in years. Ari Zeller, one of the first major venture partners I had ever pitched to, back when I was still explaining what Axis could do with whiteboards and sleepless confidence. Back when I still believed merit would always be enough. He'd passed back then, not out of disinterest, but because I had too much vision for the team I was surrounded by. He said that like it was a compliment. At the time, I thought it was a rejection. Turns out it was just a delay. Now, he was in my inbox again, short, direct. Let's talk. No pitch, no deck, just you. We met in a private garden cafe in Westwood, the kind that doesn't advertise and doesn't seat anyone without an introduction. Ari was already there. No assistant, no laptop, just a black notebook and a pen that he never uncapped. He stood as I approached. Morena, he said, as if he hadn't said my name in a decade. Finally. He didn't mean finally, we're meeting. He meant finally, they see what I already did. There was no small talk. I've been watching, he said after our drinks arrived. You never said a word, never retaliated. You just let the work speak. I had nothing to prove, I said. They proved it for me. He smiled, not smug, respectful. What you built, Morena, It was never just software, it was a system of belief, and belief can't be scaled by people who don't understand it. I said nothing, because there was nothing to add. He leaned forward. I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to ask you one question. He didn't blink. What do you want to build next? No slides, no business model, no ROI projection, just trust. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I'd never been asked like that. Not as a replacement for what they lost, but as the seed of something new. I don't want to build another Axis, I finally said. I want to build something with memory, something that remembers who made it and why. Ari nodded. Whatever it is, he said, I'm in, fully. And just like that, without a contract, without a term sheet, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not vindicated, not victorious, free. It started with a key. A single silver key to a space that still smelled like dust and forgotten ambition. The building was nothing special. An old brick warehouse in Pasadena, tucked behind a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore. No signs, no concierge. Just a stairwell that creaked when you climbed, and a hallway that smelled faintly of old paper and burnt espresso. The office itself. Bare. One cracked window. One flickering light overhead. A paint-stained wall from whoever came before. But to me, it was sacred. Because no one had given it to me. No one had drafted a contract, or demanded a roadmap, or asked for 5-year projections. I had chosen it. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't stepping into someone else's legacy. I was laying the first stone of mine. Ava showed up that afternoon. No ceremony, no suitcase. Just her laptop slung over one shoulder and a canvas bag that looked like it had already lived 10 startup lives. She looked around the room, then gave me a quiet grin. It's perfect, I laughed. You know that's a lie. She shrugged. I didn't say it was comfortable, I said it was perfect. We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full. Like we both knew exactly what this moment meant, even if we couldn't put words to it. 3 days earlier, she'd turned down a promotion. Dylan's team had offered her a lead engineer title, a raise, and her own team. Everything they thought a young developer would want. She declined in under 10 seconds. When they asked why, she said, because leadership without integrity is just politics, and I'd rather build something honest from the ground up than spend 1 more hour polishing someone else's mistake. They hadn't seen it coming. Neither had I, honestly. But when she messaged me that night with a single line, I'm in if you're building, I didn't hesitate. I replied, come to Pasadena, we'll figure it out. We didn't start with product. We started with truth. We wrote on the walls, ideas, principles, promises. We mapped out not just what we wanted to create, but what we refused to become. We listed everything we had lost. Not for pity, for clarity, no egos, no silent exclusions, no pretending data is more important than people. We didn't know what we were building yet, but we knew who we were building it with. And sometimes, that's all you need. On our 5th day, Ava stood back from the wall and wrote a sentence in thick black marker. No context, no explanation. This time, we remember who built it. I didn't touch it, didn't edit it, just stared at it for a long time. Because that was it, that was everything. We weren't just writing code. We were writing a promise, 1 brick at a time. The elevator still made that soft mechanical sigh at every floor. I'd forgotten how familiar that sound was. How many times I'd waited in that chrome box, adjusting my sleeves, preparing for another meeting, another fire to put out, another set of ideas to defend. But today was different. Today, I wasn't preparing for anything. I was finishing it. I stepped into the lobby like a ghost revisiting the house that once tried to bury her. The receptionist looked up, startled, then quickly composed herself, pretending not to know who I was. But she knew. Everyone did. I didn't wear a suit, no laptop, no briefcase, just a manila folder and the calm weight of someone who has already won. Upstairs, the walls were quieter. Gone were the framed team photos, the inspirational quotes, the future is now posters Dylan loved to scatter like confetti. The energy was sterile now, apologetic. Brandon was waiting outside the conference room, face taut with professionalism, but I could see it, underneath. Fatigue, regret, maybe a little awe. "Morena," he said with a slow nod. "Thank you for coming." I said nothing. We stepped inside. A lawyer I didn't recognize slid papers across the table. Release of claim, transfer of rights, mutual non-disparagement, indemnity. It was all ceremonial at this point. The actual IP had long since reverted back to me the moment the lawsuits were filed and my contracts were dug out of archive storage like relics. But they needed this. Closure. Clean edges. I signed. 1 page at a time. No hesitation, no fanfare. When I was done, I slid the pen across the table and stood. Brandon cleared his throat. "If you ever wanted to return," I cut him off with a look, not unkind, just final. As I walked out of the office, through halls I had once helped build, past rooms where I'd once shaped entire visions from thin air, I felt nothing bitter, only clarity. They had my signature now, but I had everything that mattered. Reputation, ideas, influence, people. They had their company, but I had my name. And in the end, that was the only door that ever truly mattered. The whiteboard was still blank. We stood in front of it, me and Ava, each holding a marker we hadn't uncapped in hours. It wasn't that we didn't know what to write. It was that we didn't have to yet. There were no bullet points, no launch strategies, no user funnels or monetization models. The board waited patiently, like the beginning of a story that finally trusted its authors. The air in the office still carried the scent of paint and plywood. The second-hand furniture wobbled. The Wi-Fi cut out twice that morning. Our coffee was cold, but the room pulsed with something stronger than adrenaline. Faith. Not in a product. In each other. In what we were here to build. And more importantly, what we weren't. This wasn't revenge. We didn't stay up late plotting takedowns or whispering about the company I left behind. That part of the story was over. The final box had been signed, the last apology delivered in corporate tone. But we were still here. And this was something else. This was ours. There was no calendar forcing us forward. No investor demanding deliverables. No one asking for performance metrics before we'd written a single line of code. We were creating space. Space for questions that didn't have to be answered in 5 slides. Space to ask, what does it look like to build something that honors the builders? Ava pulled her hair up into a knot, exhaled, and finally popped the cap off her marker. "You know," she said, stepping toward the board, "we could start with a question." I smiled. "Okay," I said. "What question?" She paused, then wrote, "What kind of world are we building?" Simple, huge, right. We stared at it in silence. Outside, traffic moved, other offices filled with people chasing metrics they didn't believe in. But in here, we weren't chasing anything. We were creating something that had never existed before. Not a platform, not a company, a world. One where people were seen, where integrity wasn't a PR strategy, where no one got quietly erased because they didn't play the right politics. Ava looked at me. "No more pretending?" she asked. "Never again," I said. She nodded and added a second line under the first. "Let's make it impossible to forget who built it." The board was no longer blank, and neither were we.